What is up, Can't Believers and high performers? Welcome to another episode of the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. I am your podcast host and high performance mentor, Desi Abeda. What's good, people? Happy Friday. I made the mistake again, and it started to get to a point where I think I just need the type of equipment that just stays on no matter what. It's so funny. I'm recording this on the day before that this podcast is getting released. So I'm recording this on Thursday, whereas I first recorded it on Wednesday. So I ran through the whole thing, felt really good about it. And then lo and behold, I go to play it right before I'm about to schedule it to post. And I'm listening and there's no audio. And I'm like, what the hell? So I'm listening a little bit more and I'm like, maybe it's my Bluetooth. And obviously with it being 2021, most of us use Bluetooth to some extent. I'm listening and I'm like, man, maybe there's something wrong with my headphones. So I plug them back in. I go to play it on my computer. It's not working. So I'm like, hey, God dang it. Like, what the heck? What the heck happened? So I pull up the video and lo and behold, I ended up looking, my mic was actually off. And I'm so glad that I actually listened to the audio and listened to the video beforehand, because what would have come out on Friday would have been dead air. And for anyone who knows radio, music, anything like that, you don't want dead air. It's just not a good look. And so, in all of my imperfection, I am re-recording this, and so I'm really hoping that I continue to bring the energy, because what we're going to do today is definitely new, and I'm super excited about it because I had this idea a little bit while back, and when you step into podcasting, I posted about this earlier this week. Absolutely living the dream of heading into episode 70 and beyond. I mean, you all know, for a lot of my day one listeners, and for those of you, thank you so much. And for those who are new, 100%, thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your day just to hear me blabber. Hear me blabber about all things that fulfill me, and really pushing you to be that hero, and to create that main character energy that we all need in order to be that hero in our own hero's journey. Um, so for those that didn't know, I overthought this project way beyond what I needed to. And the Don't Keep Your Day Job podcast, it actually had a little mastermind, about I want to say like 3 years ago. So she ended up, Kelly Heller had a mastermind where she just brought some speakers in, and she was trying to push all of the attendees to, like, hey, like, this is how you navigate your dreams. This is how you overcome imposter syndrome. This is how you overcome that self-doubt that you're feeling, that no one's going to want to listen to what I'm saying. Like, why am I that important? And so, like, it was such a great mastermind. But I remember going to that and I was like, all right, I got to get this figured out. I've purchased this course, and because I purchased this course, I got into this little mastermind. So, like, there's something about this project that is stopping me from doing something that feels authentic. And I overthought this project for 3 years, and then finally, wow, I want to say, I don't think was it last year? I'm gonna have to look at the dates again. I highly disbelieve that this has only been a year, but as I'm talking this out with you all live, oh my God, wow, that's really cool to kind of look at yourself year to year and kind of compare where you're at. So this was actually 2 years ago. For my birthday, I was like, so my birthday is coming up right now, December 30th. Shout out to all you people who have that. I do know that Tiger Woods and LeBron James has that. So I'm in good company, right? So for my birthday 2 years ago, I remember like kind of thinking to myself, I was like, all right, you know what? I'm done overthinking this project. There's a reason why I'm trying to avoid it. And I think that we get a lot of intentionality and a lot of clarity when we know that we need to do something, but for some reason, one reason or another, we're choosing to not do it. Whether it's fear, whether it's uncertainty, whether it's imposter syndrome, whether it's self-doubt, whether it's all the reasons and barriers that we kind of create for ourselves, where we tell ourselves to, like, stay in that safe place. Like, hey, like, you're safe here. You might not be happy, but you're safe, because the certainty behind being safe and unhappy and not living in your fulfillment is just a safe thing, right? And I remember thinking to myself, and I was like, all right, you know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna go ahead and just go forward with this. It's my birthday. I think at the time I was turning 34. I was like, it's my birthday. I'm done doing this. So, and it just so happened too, like, we talked a little bit, I want to say in episodes 30 to 40, we talked about the social circle, and we talked about how important it is to surround yourself with people who are not only like minded, but are going to challenge you and are going to help you show up as your most authentic self, all while balancing that act of certainty and uncertainty. Because I think to a larger degree, it makes total sense when people are doing something new that is a hard thing. As a high performance mentor who dials people back into their habits and their fulfillment, when they step in, like there is a lot of joy with, okay, I have someone helping me, I have accountability, I have a community of people who are doing some of the same things. This feels great. But there's also that level of uncertainty where it's like, you know what? I have to choose the type of uncertainty I'm okay with. There might be a lot of uncertainty with what's about to happen versus the uncertainty of when am I ever going to get this figured out? And I felt like 2 years ago with this podcast, I got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm done fucking around. I want to make sure that I am not only practicing what I preach, but also I'm submitting a legacy for myself where it just reminds me that I can do hard things. Cause at the time, my daughter was 3 years old. And for any of my parents out there, shout out to you. Or even if you're going to be a parent at some point, or we've had parents, we all have relationship with parents. Parenting's a really hard thing because not only are you in charge of trying to develop a young, like very loving and compassionate and good human being, but it starts with you. Like you have to be the mold that you're trying to work toward when you're trying to develop this young human. At least that's the way that I approach parenting. And it was a great reminder then of just kind of coming back and saying, okay, like how do I want to operate with this? What are the messages that I want to get out? And am I able to take messy action? I think that was probably the first episode that came out is how to take messy action. And it was so relative to where I'm at stepping into episode 70. And as I was looking at continuing into 2022 with this podcast and really, really loving what I'm doing and really, really having a passion for podcasting now, was looking at like, okay, what are some different areas that I can touch on in reference to creating a better environment, not only for you as listeners, but also things that you might want to share. And I was kind of looking at it and I was like, okay, we have our Mentorship Monday videos dropping, or our pods and videos dropping. I feel really good about those. It's very digestible content. It's really quick, 12 to 15 minutes. We get in, we get out, like, hey, this is how you help your life. Let's go. And then I was kind of looking at Friday episodes and I was like, I'm really enjoying talking to high performing people and tapping into their stories and tapping into like what makes them special. And I think for those that are listening and are ongoing fans of this pod, and once again, thank you so much for being families of the pod. I think that we can all agree, like we are touching on a great deal of mental health. We are touching on a great deal of figuring out a way to keep going. We are touching on our social environment. We are touching on some of the skills, the tactics, the characteristics that create success for a lot of these people. And so as I was kind of going into 2022, and I was like, you know what, like I kind of want to throw something else in there. It's been really great to talk to high performing people, but I want to touch on some other things. And so a little bit of backstory with our new segment that we're going to be starting here, kind of initially throwing them in on Fridays. We'll have a good mixture of having some other people on from our Hero's Journey series. But I was looking back and I was like, all right, what have been some of the most creative projects that I have ever been a part of? Like, what have I felt really good at? And I think back to these moments. I used to work in an inpatient residential treatment center, and so for those that didn't know, I met my wife working with her with primary eating disorders in residential treatment. She was the therapist, I was the dietitian. We were going to come together and just like save everyone together, right? And what was really cool about it is being part of a team that trusted one another. We got to a point with a lot of our eating disorder inpatient clients that we were like, we want to hit them from a different angle. Like, what are some things that are going to inspire hope or get them to think a bit more logically, get them to think intellectually, and then also emotionally? Like, what are some of the things that we're going to trigger them to start thinking a bit more on the broad spectrum of versatility? And I knew that I really loved TED Talks. I love them. And for those of you who are like, oh, yeah, me too, like, hey, we're one and the same. That's why you listen to this pod, right? So I was thinking to myself back then, I was like, I really love TED Talks. Like, I want to go do one myself. Um, I really want to do that. I think it would be great. And so I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, we give them a lot of education on emotional agility. We give them a lot of education on their past experiences with trauma, their past conditioning. And then obviously a heavy dose of how do we create better relationships with food, with our body, with exercise, with how we think, how we feel, everything. You kind of get it. You kind of can probably see what I'm getting at and why I talk about what I talk about because of where I've come from, right? So we were thinking about it, and I was like, I think it would be cool to have a TED Talks group where the main objective is to get them in there. We're not necessarily talking about therapy. We're not necessarily talking about food or trauma. Like, we're just giving them a chance to nourish their brains and to nourish their ideas. And so we went in, and I was like, I don't really know what to expect here. So the whole premise of the group was called TED Talks, right? The whole premise of the group was to nourish their ideas, was to nourish the creative parts of them that have been lost in a lot of the disconnection from their body, in their addictions, anything like that. And it was a wild success. We would have people in there that would go through, and we were just simply talking about a TED Talk, and I would give some prompting questions and be like, hey, what are some of the things that resonated most with you? You know, what are you taking from this talk? How can you build that into your own life? And so it offered a platform for them to not put such an emphasis on always self-developing, always trying to get better, but purely trying to nourish the aspects of them that are just creating ideas, that are thinking creatively, that are thinking outside of the box, and then also that are able to empathize and create compassion with other people's stories. And I feel like when we look at a high performing individual, those individuals can do that. And that's what I'm trying to push for you all today and beyond. That's been the whole premise of the podcast, right? Becoming a more high performing human being where you're able to observe the way that you think, the way that you act, and the way that you feel. And you're able to represent those things in your highest, happiest, and healthiest self in all areas of your life, all of them. And that's what being a high performing human is. Okay. So that long introduction is actually what I wanted to talk about today, which is going to be our new series, Things You Need to Hear. All right. So, with this new series, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking some TED Talks. We're going to be taking some audio clips, some video clips of things that as I'm listening to them, I'm like, wow, this is super influential. Like, I feel like people should hear this. And so, this is why we're going to take this Things You Need to Hear. These pods are probably going to be anywhere from about 15 to 25 minutes, depending on the type of pod. It could be 30, but it's going to be a little bit more short form content where, if you're, for those of us who are actually going back into work, going on a walk, anything like that, you should be able to complete this pod in a timely fashion. And so, welcome to our new series, Things You Need to Hear, with our first guest, if you will, or our first video. This is probably the book that changed a lot of my life, if I'm being perfectly frank. For those that don't know, I am not a huge sit down and read type of person. I have tried it. I have tried to do deep breathing. I have tried to do classical music in the background. I am very much a part of the ADHD crowd. I no longer look at that as a crux. I actually look at it as a superpower because you know what? I know how I operate. I know how I operate best, and I know where my productivity lands, and that's the way I work. And that's why we have what we have today. Like I know what I do best. And so I did not read this book, but it was the first book that I actually listened to from front to back, and it was one that really changed a lot of things for me because it explained a lot and it gave me hope that one, my habits mattered. Two, the way that I think about myself matters. And three, regardless of my environment, there are always going to be opportunities, and my ability rather, to present that opportunity and to step up to it and to work in a way to be resilient is going to be the biggest measure of change. And that's what really excites me about this. So, with our first TED Talk, I just want to do a small presentation. After leaving a high-flying job in consulting, Angela Lee Duckworth took a job teaching math to seventh graders in a New York public school. She then quickly realized that IQ wasn't the only thing separating the successful students from those who struggled. So in this TED Talk, she explains her theory of grit as a predictor of success. Here is Angela Lee Duckworth's TED Talk called Grit, the Power of Passion and Perseverance. We'll talk a little bit more as she's done, but here we go.
When I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I went to teach seventh graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in seventh grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure, things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I stumbled across her book called Grit, and I'll make sure I put this in the show notes during that time, and it actually explained a lot of possibly what I was feeling, and we've talked about this in past podcasts, and I've been pretty clear with what 2020 did for me in a lot of ways because it built resilience. And I think one of the things that I came from that year understanding is that if I can continue to put enough effort in my productivity and learning about my behavior and healing, a part of my past conditioning and learning how to become the best version of myself, which is why obviously a lot of the mantra that we talk about in the Can't Believe I Made It podcast is helping you to show up into all areas of your life as your happiest, your healthiest, and your highest self. One of the things that came up was resilience. And so having read this book and then obviously life just happening, heading from there, especially with 2020, as I look at this year, and this is kind of just me talking this out with you, and as you're listening to this, I want you to ponder on a couple thoughts. Right, the first one is, what are your overall thoughts or feelings or comments of what you just heard? What Angela Lee Duckworth just talked about, and going even further, how can you apply that to your life? All right, because as I'm kind of talking this out with you, I'm going to be doing some of the same things, and so that you're getting a little bit more into my psyche. Again, looking at 2020, heading, really taking resilience as like the strong word for me, heading into 2021, I think one of the things that I have got from this year as we, close right now, it'll be December 10th as this podcast gets launched. Heading into 2022, I look at 2021 as intentionality, because in 2020 I had to create some resilience behind, like, okay, Des, you can do hard things if you're continuing to put enough effort and you're continuing to immerse yourself in what it looks like to seek an evolution. Like, good things are going to happen. So when I look at this past year, I think even more so, I look at my routines, I look at my habits, I look at my mental health, I look at putting myself in really uncomfortable situations in that from the standpoint of growth. Intentionality comes up for me. And I think one of the things as I listen to this talk again, because again, I had already read the book, listening to this talk for, I think, probably the sixth time, I wanted to share with you three components that I think are going to be incredibly influential for us to understand and for us to really, really try to sit with, to observe our thoughts around it, and to make what you can with them. All right. So the first thing that I wanted to take note of, that Angela Lee Duckworth talked about, is that talent doesn't make you gritty, which is super evident. Even as I was working in professional sports, There were guys that I worked with that were super talented, super talented. But it's a little bit of a gift and a curse because to some men, when you come from where you came from, you might be the most talented person in the room. But when push comes to shove and you're presented with people who have the same talent, that's where the playing field is evened. And that's what I used to see on the athlete level. And this is what I see also in my mentorship programs. You see people that come in that are super talented, but they have put every single thing into that talent, and it has actually given them an opportunity to be vulnerable, right? Because they have not worked on other aspects of them that has helped them to be successful. And you can see this at the athlete level. And so when I saw this and I heard it, I was like, okay, talent doesn't make you gritty. So talent isn't everything, which I think for a lot of us who are trying to create better talent around some of our passions, trying to create better talent around the way that we move, the routines that we are a part of, this is actually good news. You know, the talented aren't always going to win. And at the same time, and this builds into my second point here, at the same time, taking a look at your growth mindset is going to be a huge asset because change can happen with effort. And I've posted about this before, and I think it's really relative. I mean, some of the biggest past conditioning or biggest stories that I tend to find from speaking with a lot of you is that I don't have time. I don't know how to do this. I don't have the money. You know, when we look at it too, it is entirely okay for us to sit with that story because it's actually very true for you in the moment. And you can kind of insert other stories that you have too, right? It doesn't have to be those three. But when we look at our past stories, it's important for us to observe them because in a lot of way we put limits on ourselves, right? We create barriers as to why we can't have certain things that are either value systems of ours or things that maybe we just don't think that we can get to. We put a lot of limits, and that's what we call the limiting mindset, limiting beliefs. And so as we start to expand on that, we start to look at the relationship with that limiting belief and starting to examine how can we create growth? How can we create abundance from the way that we are thinking about this? So if in fact that one of your stories is I don't have time, which is a limiting belief, the way that we head that into growth mindset is I am able to prioritize my time by doing X, Y, and Z. And that's kind of what we're doing with our Mentorship Monday episode. So if you have not heard what I'm talking about here, please go back to episode 72, this last episode, where we're talking about identifying behaviors and creating identity beliefs around your habits. Because that's where you get to start to question who you are a little bit more. You get to start to embody the type of person who does X, Y, and Z as it pertains to your values, your goals, and going beyond. And so that was one of the things that really triggered, like, okay, this is good news for all of us dreamers that really want beautiful things. And as listeners, that's you. That's who they are talking to. So that's good news for us. And the last thing here is failure, a relationship with failure, because we have to be willing to fail so that we can get lessons learned. And let me tell you, I I hate failing. I hate it. And I also understand that that is a limiting belief of mine. I don't like to fail. But as we kind of push that into having more of a growth mindset, we start to initiate embodying someone. And this is kind of me talking this out with you and in hopes that you can kind of mold this in for yourself. In saying that, I can also have the growth mindset of embodying someone who is willing to put myself out there to fail, to gain feedback, because feedback and progression is a value system of mine. And it's really important for me that not only I practice what I preach, that I'm about that work, but also that others see it so that they can also be inspired. Okay, I dove into those identity based statements a little bit, but that's an example right there. So we have to be willing to fail because failure is feedback, as uncomfortable as that is. And you can insert any health behavior that we're talking about here. You can insert any business idea, any creative idea. Your ability to take action on that, to create effort, and to learn from your failures is going to be the formula for your success. whatever success may be to you. Okay, so as we kind of ponder Angela Lee Duckworth's words with this, I just want to leave you with a couple things. One, go get her book. It's freaking amazing. It'll explain a lot for those who are currently high performers and looking to be high performers in your life. It explains a lot. The talented don't always win. That is great news for all of us. Okay. Creating a growth mindset is going to be one of the biggest advantages that you can have for you, your life, your family, your work, everything, on top of being okay with failing. So as you listen to this, you already know I'm going to give you homework. Okay. So 2022 is around the corner. Again, what we're trying to teach here is to take messy action on application. So if something here spoke to you, all I want you to do is take a screenshot. Please post it on socials. Tag us at I Made It Pod on IG. You can tag me personally at Desi Abeda. I'm freaking trying to show up everywhere. And you can also share this with someone that you care about. Share this with someone that you know that heading into the new year is already creating new goals and needs a little kick in the butt to help them understand the value of grit, because that's what this is. That's what it takes in order to be successful. So I wanted to welcome you to with our first pod here. I hope you enjoy it. Please, please, please feel free to give me feedback with one of our new series. We're going to have one of three now, but one of our new series that I'm excited to continue to do, Things You Need to Hear with Angela Lee Duckworth. I hope you enjoyed the pod. We'll catch you on the next one. Let's get it.